I will talk about the ancient alphabet today and try to make a little course for someone who doesn't know so much about it, but it's not going to be long because this we could talk with a lot. It's so huge, this story about the alphabet, how that developed. But I'm going to look around what has been really interesting me the last couple of months is the development of alphabet that was used in the Bible, of course. Is that ancient? Is that new? Who created it? How did it come about? That's the main interest here. And then we will touch a little bit around everything else. This dictionary was found, they said in Syria, but I know it's south in Turkey, in a place called Kazan, close to Urfa. There they found this dictionary, and it's more like a book that you can see the Sumerian words and Akkadian words. It's like, if we think this was close after the Tower of Babel, they really need to know, what are you saying? You know, what is this? And then they say it in both languages. So it sees that this is very ancient, those two languages. And we know that Akkadian had to do with the Tower of Babel. They built it, Nimrod built it, and he also built Akkad and started this big Akkadian empire. But this is interesting because what we are seeing here is not an alphabet really. It's a form of writing. And what I'm going to talk about today is the alphabet. So I'm not going to talk so much about this cuneiform writing, but we have to mention it because when it starts up and they started to use this cuneiform, they developed, you know, a writing that they had a whole word, that everything marked a word. Let's say this is a light, then they had something for light. We will come back to that during the time, the hour we are talking about it. So when you have words and not sounds, you need a lot of signs. You understand? Just like maybe the Chinese and the Japanese have today. So they put together to make longer and longer words, and if you have a sound, it's easier, you know, to make it a little alphabet like we have. So this was very difficult to learn, but that it was used for several hundred years as the main thing to write on. And here you see some of the cuneiform writings. And everything you find in old time, in Sumer, in Babylon, in Syria, because everything was Akkadian in the start, because they say that Akkadian learned it from Sumer. I don't know which way it was, but the Akkadian, they spread it because they had the first world empire, so they spread it all over. So the tables they found in Ebla, for instance, that they could find is in Hebrew, because when they translate it, you know, what this word was, it was Hebrew, an earlier form of Hebrew, but the writing was Akkadian. But Akkadian and Hebrew was very close languages, like Arabic and Hebrew is very close today. So Akkadian was a Semitic language, even if it was Nimrod who was there or not. So at the right side here, you see another of the same kind of writing, and that's what the Egyptians had, the hieroglyphs. And the hieroglyphs, they use the same, like we put in something that means a word, and then we have put all this word together, we have a sentence. So it's a form of writing, but it's not an alphabet. That's important to say first of all. I shouldn't take too long time to run. Some of you might know that already. But here is the first alphabet, and that's interesting for us. I've never been to this place, but it is in Sinai. I wish to get there sometime, and as I say there, maybe some will join me. It's in a place where they used to have these mines to take out all this Turkish stone, and there they have been for many hundred years actually at that time, and that the first time you see writing that is sounds, not a word, is in this remote place. First time they ever found it, but I found several more later. And therefore it's called Proto-Sinaiticus because it's what we call today the Sinai Peninsula. You see a map of it afterwards. And the place is called Sarabit el-Khadim today. And if you see here, the first letter, the sound, is a word, but it doesn't mean a word. So if they knew that Aleph was an ox head, it started with that, so then they know it was the letter A, the sound A. And then they could put together, and I think this is very interesting. I hope you do it too. Can you see my arrow here now? This is a very easy one to find everywhere because it's Bet, and Bet is a home or a house. And you can see there is this is a kind of house with a little door here. Sometimes it's just a square with no door on. But here, and the sound is B, because Bet is Hebrew. And that's interesting, isn't it? Coming closer to that. This is a G, start of it, it's a Gimel. And this is a Dalet. That's very difficult to see what this is, but it is a fish. And what they say today is they might have used some of the Egyptian hieroglyph, you know, to write this signs, but it's not Coptic or Egyptian language. This is Hebrew. So this fish, it's a kind of extinct. That was why they used it in Egypt, because fish was stinking when they come dead off of the Nile. That's what they explain. But it is a fish, and this that later turned to E, they said he, and it's a person. It started with a person that has his hand up here. You see, it's a head and two hands that is shouting, you know, because he is terrified. So this is the first letter in being terrified. And after a while, they just stopped drawing the head, and it was 3 signs in the top. And then they turned it, because they wrote both ways and up and down, so you couldn't really understand which way it should be unless you look at the head. And if it turned this way, you should read this way, and if it turned this way, you should write or read it the other way. This is a vav, it's starting of a vav. We will see that many times. If you just remember a few of these, it will be more interesting to see what we come to. This is just, you know, like yeah, a head on the top of a stitch. Zayin, it becomes a zet with the T, zet. And this is het, is the fence, really. It's the first letter of fence. That becomes the sound. This is a yod, or a G, or a Y. This is a hand with fingers. And that was in the letter, there was the first like a hand, kaf. So that's hand in Hebrew, I understand. So you see a lot of these letters in different way with this hand that changed after a while. And Lamet is L, of course, it's like a hook. And Mem, that's an easy one. You will see that several times. It's because it's the first sound in water in Hebrew, and that's why they have this Mem, this M. And it started with just water, like waves. And sometimes you see them this way or the other way. It depends. And Nun, that becomes an N. That was a kind of, it looks like an M, but it just has a few which I call waves on it. Ayin is an I in Hebrew. Zade became this one, and Gof, Kof, this is a Q. It's after a while it looks also like the counting 8, the number 8. This R is interesting because that was the first letter, and you can see a head, and that turns after a while. But they used to draw this head, and Egyptian hieroglyphs has a lot of heads and face, and this way or the other way. Zin is this one. and it also changed after a while, but they used this one in the first alphabet. And then you have the T that's changed very often also from an X, like we call an X, or just a cross. That was a T in the beginning. So if you remember some of those, you can follow the lecture easier after a while. And this is the first sound alphabet. And that was an explosion, because now they needed just a few ones, right? Because when you have sounds, you just need to put together sounds. Then you don't have so many letters. And I think, I really remember now how many they had, but it's almost what we have today. We have a little more, so we can express and write. This one they also have found other places, and we'll come back to that, but this is the first they found. So it's not that they were the first one who wrote it, but it's the first they found. So, and that is some years ago. There you see again, here is it called Proto-canaanite, not Proto-Sinaitic. Why is that? It's because when they found it, more and more, this writing in Canaan, Israel today, they called it Proto-Canaanite. But it's the same alphabet that they found in Proto-Sinaitic. So was it Canaanite people who were down there digging in these mines? It was Egyptian. We can see, because there is also found a lot of hieroglyphs there at the same place, the same time. So this was Egyptian. Well, what did the Canaanites do there? Well, we will be back to that. But you see here again the same signs, the head, the alpha, and the bet, the home or house, the L, or is a G really. And you see D, the fish, is becoming more like a square or a rectangle after a while. The fence or E, see they changed a little bit. And Zayin, here's the fish, and the Dal, it was something else up here. And here you see this he, this frightening person, and the T is inside a circle here, and the Y has become like a river. So, but Kaf is the same. You can see this hand, the K, and the M is very significant. Some of them is the same, you can see. And here's the R, ahead. So it is the same. This is Shin, that is a little different here, but it is the same. They look different. And the T, they have two T's here, so they use it if they want to have T-E or T-A, because they didn't have any vocals. It was just a consonant alphabet. So sometimes they put a vocal after it, so they knew which one, what vocal were coming. After a while, they started with dots instead, you know, in the Semitic languages. But I think it's interesting, you know, and this one you find very often. So you see that it was Canaanite when they found it in Canaan, and it was Proto-Sinaitic when they found it in Sinai. So now we have found them two places. Yeah, it's the Dalet is a gate. Yeah, that's what they say up here also. What's interesting here is they found some of this in Sinai. They found were from the 12th dynasty, and some are from the 18th dynasty. And how they know that is because they also wrote hieroglyphic, and they said what pharaoh that was there at that time. We also know that Hatshepsut was out there, and she was from the 18th dynasty, and we have some other names from the 18th dynasty, and we have some pharaohs from the 12th dynasty. So, but they didn't write this. That was in hieroglyphs, but this is not hieroglyphs. This is actually alphabet. That was quite new also to the Egyptians. Well, here comes a man a few years ago. His name is Dr. Douglas Petrovich. I have to tell a little bit about him because I'm going through some picture now that is his work. He is an assistant professor and a doctor. People like the titles, you know, but he so I have to tell that. He wrote a book some years ago that is called The World's Oldest Alphabet. And what he says is, if you're going to read those alphabet and read the words and understand what they were writing, you have to see that this is Hebrew. And you know, when I look at this, I was fascinating, right? But I have to read also what the critics are saying about this. So I read a lot of critics about it to see what is their argument against it, because they see it's Canaanite. And Canaanite was also, they say, the learned people, that it was very like or very like in the sounds like the Hebrew, or some way they learned from each other, like the Akkadian language. And up in Syria, they spoke dialects of the same language, they say. So why they are so against that this should be Hebrew? Well, they said Hebrew is a more modern, it came later. You know, if they don't like the Bible, they will say that that's later. Hebrew is later. But you know, some of you I know very well knows that the Ebla tablets that is in cuneiform, they found if they read that in Hebrew context, Old Hebrew, it was the same. They understood it when they could read it in as a Hebrew language. Then they saw the words and they saw all the names of the Bible, place names and person names. So why should this, that is from the same time as Ebla, why couldn't that be in a understandable Hebrew? Of course it can. So I found it very interesting, this book he has been written about it. And we will look at some of his samples when he tried to translate what is written here in Proto-Sinaiticus in Sinai Peninsula. Another one that caught my interest in this alphabet is this man. His name is Tim Mahoney, and he just came out with this movie that he has built over the things that this man I just showed you. I'm so clever in forgetting names. Douglas Petrovich. His work and also other people's work around Sinai Mountain in Saudi Arabia. He has been there together with some friends of ours. Aaron, if somebody knows him, and then Muller and others. He was there together with them, so he's also making a film about that later on. But he was also caught by the interest of this first alphabet, because people told him when he was traveling around down there that no, the Hebrew couldn't write at that time, and Moses could never have written the Genesis and what we call them the Moses books in Norwegian, and the Genesis, Exodus, Deuteronomy, all this Torah that they say Moses had been written. No, he could never write that. That's what they say. Also, the archaeologists in Israel, most of them, believe it or believe it not. And he got frustrated. He's Moses, he's not written this, but if God wrote the Ten Commandments and a lot of things that he was supposed to put there and write about all this law, you know, to write with pictures takes a lot of materials and it's very difficult. And the Torah is so complicated book that to write it in something else than an alphabet will be very, very difficult. So he got very frustrated, and when he read that there's a lot of researchers going on in Sinai, he came over the book, Petrovsky's book, and he also came over other researchers that are researching the letters they found north in Saudi Arabia, now that it's able to go in there and see all the scripture there. We will look upon this also. So he has made a film. It's finished, and a few months ago in March, he rented a lot of theaters in the United States, and it was shown to the public for the first time. We have not been able to see it here when we live in Europe. I hope it will be on DVD or YouTube soon, and then I will recommend you to see it. But I saw some interview with him, and I think it's very good. And people that got interviewed after, they were very, very fascinated over the research that so many people have done already. So that's in the air for the time now. There's many who are researching this. So let's dig into it and have a look. This is one of the oldest inscriptions. It's from, don't look at how old it is, 1842. I think it's far too old. It's not that old because it's from the dynasty 12 and it was not at that time. But that's what I believe, those who have, I have taken these pictures from, borrowed from. But it is from the dynasty 12. And those people here, it's a man on a donkey, you see, and this man who is going in the front, he's getting older and older every year because it's a lot of them. And you see there's some writing up here. Can you see? It's a little hieroglyphic. Can you see that? Because in hieroglyphs they use a lot of these birds, and that's not in the alphabet. But they have this N, they have the I a little of, they have this bet here. So some of them you can recognize, but it's not like it's quite developed yet. I think that's very fascinating. These are numbers, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and you will see the translating of it soon. Here that comes. And the fellow here is called Shechem. That's interesting because what he is thinking about, him, the Petrovsky, who translated it, is that Manasseh had a son called Shechem. So he said, could this Hebdebli, maybe that's Manasseh, and this is the grandchild of Joseph. Maybe they were the one traveling out there at that time. But he says, if you translate it, if you use these letters and put them in a Hebrew language, it says 6 Levantines, Hebrew of Bethel, the beloved. That's what the text said. Hebrews of Bethel. Of course, people are furious about this. Are they Hebrews? They should be Canaanites, they say. But the Hebrews lived in Canaan. We know that. Levantine, that is, that's what you call the whole area, Israel and Lebanon, Syria, and up at the coast. It's called Levantine. So 6 Levantines, Hebrew of Bethel, the beloved. And it is written while the Israelites, they were in Goshen at that time, Dynasty 12. We know that because in the grave chambers in Dynasty 12, we can see they were visited by the Hyksos, the Hekakase. They got visitors, and they were rulers from foreign land, yes, but they lived in Goshen. We know that because when you have been in Goshen, you can see there are things from the 12th dynasty there, and the other way they visited each other and were good friends, the Hyksos rulers, because they were city-states at that time, and no pharaohs ruled the whole Egypt unless a few times in Egypt's history. And at that time, it was several rulers at the same time, different areas of Egypt. So that they were going down there, it's easy to explain, because they were, in that case, they were what is called Hyksos in Egypt. And Hyksos kingdom, you can see maps all over, but this was the Hyksos kingdom at that time. And the 12th dynasty, it was not that big, because the 12th dynasty was located in Memphis. And then there was pharaohs here and pharaohs up here. There were pharaohs in several cities. In Abydos here, it was pharaohs, and all over. Here is the Hekwa Shasu, they call foreign nomads in hieroglyphs, and it's translated with this hieroglyph as nomads and Yahweh, you can see, or Jew. So they ruled Egypt, and later on they ruled all of this area, also Sinai, and up here also. They also ruled in Bethel. They ruled in Gaza. They ruled in Lacha, in all this area they were around. But they were not kind of bad rulers. They were most trading, you know, and because kingdoms at that time were more like can you say, friends, and we help each other mostly. And they found the cartouches all over from the Hyksos kingdom, so they know they have been there. So if this is Canaanite, and the Proto-Canaanite language is found up here, and you can read it in Hebrew, and I also found it we are looking at all this inscription, they are down here into the mountainside here around in this area in Sinai. So I believe very strongly that this is the Hyksos people, because that's what they were called before they were slaves, and they were not slaves before in 18th dynasty. So what I say about the Hyksos contribution, they were not stupid people. They introduced copper and bronze and instruments and a lot of weapons and horse and chariots and swords. They came with a lot to Egypt. We know that. So they were not illiterate, that some professors say that those who wrote these languages down there in Sinai were illiterate Canaanite slaves. No, they were not. Here is some more that we will translate for you. And this is like a Rosetta Stone, because it is written both in hieroglyphic and in this new alphabet in Sinai. So here you can translate what they were written. And this is much closer. It's from 1480. It's from 18th dynasty. So at that time, I just have to, like I say in the left corner here, this is in the midst of the slavery. It's 34 years before Exodus, if they are right about this exact year. I'm not sure about that, but it's around there, because they see what Pharaoh they are talking about. So and remember, it's a mixture of people. You will see they worshipped Hathor, that is an Egyptian cow god, and the Hebrew did that. They did that also when they come to Sinai. They built this calf and said that that was their god. And they called her Bala, and that was an Aramean word for a goddess. And there was also Aramean in Goshen. Why we know that is because Abraham had 300 servants from Aramea, not Armenia, but Aramean. And where were they during this time? Of course, they too went to Goshen, even if the Bible doesn't say, but in Exodus they say it's a mixture of people that went out. But back to this Rosetta Stone in Sinai, what it says here is, he who is loved by the lady. And the lady is Balat in the Sinaiticus alphabet, and it's Hathor when they read it in the Egyptian hieroglyph. But Balat is an Aramean goddess. But let's come to the more interesting translations. So here you see again all these languages that we just learned. The bet you have here, the ox head, the M you have here, the fish. You remember this one also, the sin, and this head of the ox. You recognize them all, right? Now that you have learned a little about them, maybe you know it before. But this man, Petrovsky, he has again translated it and said this is Hebrew. And he says what it writes here, and again, this is in the middle of the slavery time. He says, a curse of 100-fold has passed through our people. A swooping has befallen us, a multitude has surrounded us. My father was completely depleted by the king. And that fits. If they now are slaves, they really fits that it's a curse now. They were free earlier on, but now they are not free anymore. And that's what they are writing about, isn't it? I think it's very obvious and very likely that this is the real translation. And let's look at some more. Here, this is a very interesting thing, because that's also talk about the oppression of the slavery. he thinks, he sought occasion to cut away the barrenness of a great number, or swelling without measure. Let's take the two first sentences here now. It's talking about that they tried to make them non-fruitful. And that's what they did, because they killed all their babies, remember? They didn't want them to have babies because they were afraid of their great number. That's what the Bible said also. They're becoming too great. They were growing, swelling without measure. And the Bible said just the same. They're becoming too much. And that's why they put them in slavery and took away their babies, their baby boys. But then they yearned for Hathor, but the quiver over the brothers was thoroughly despised. So he performed terror against their quiver and brought about a cry of wailing. It's very difficult, you know, really. They talk about the quiver, a place where you put your arrows, and they talk about a cry of wailing. It's a very pessimistic, sad expression of how they have been despised, and there is terror against them. But then mention this Hathor again, and it's difficult to know why they are so occupied with this lady, but they use her in their inscription. Still, it's 1480 around there in the next one. And remember, there were slaves at this time. They have been slaves for some years. Moses had, at that time, he had killed an Egyptian and he ran away. And this is 6 years, yeah, I've written here before he killed an Egyptian, but it's actually 6 years after and ran away. So at this time, Moses has run away from Egypt. And what they are writing here is, "Oh man, you have arrived. You have been thrown off in a year to forget." We don't know what they mean about this, but they are complaining. Their lives are bitter. And it's a little bit about also what Exodus is writing. But look what's coming next. This is also very interesting. This is from the same year that Exodus was. And that's very interesting for us, because somebody was here also at that time. So how Moses get them out is we don't know, because the Bible doesn't say if they went up to meet him or whatever they did. But what they say here is, "Our bound servitude has lingered." So servitude is a kind of slavery. It can be translated to slavery. And they are bound, and it has lingered. It has been for a long while. But Moses, that it's written in this Hebrew way, Moshe, then provoked astonishment. It is the year of astonishment because of the lady. So this is interesting. We don't know if this has been written, 1446. It's so exact what they think it is because of the Pharaoh at that time. But if they wrote that at the same year, let's say we can just be guessing, it could be the same year as they saw all these plagues that came over Egypt. That could be the Moshe's astonishment that he provoked. But the name Moshe is clearly here. If you study the language, you can try to see. Remember also always the consonant, and you have to guess what the vocal is. But it's very likely that this is Hebrew or Aramaic slaves in Sinai Peninsula writing this just in the year of the Exodus. So it's the same one. Well, let's dig a little into it, because I won't say so much about it, but it's that it looks alike the hieroglyphs, but it's not hieroglyphs, and everybody agrees about that. I have taken this one out from an Israeli professor. I forgot her name, Bas something. It's a lady professor that goes very much against this theory, but she said, and in all cases, the Canaanite translation in Sinai differs from the correct use of the hieroglyph in Egyptian. So it's not hieroglyph, but I can see it looks a little bit the same. It's kind of like they have taken some hieroglyphs and said, we will use it for something else. We use it for our letter, our sound, for what we call this, and not what the Egyptian calls it. And like the men, water, and so on, she said she can see it's the same, but they just use the sound because it's an alphabet. Here you can see some examples again. Shouldn't go too long into it, but in Egypt they also use one for the head and one for the face. But in an alphabet, you don't want to have all these words. So we just use the head, and after a while it just became like this, right? It's just a head and a neck, that's all, because I just needed the sound. And the next thing that happened was exciting, because very close to Luxor, that was the main city, the Theban was the main city of the 18th dynasty. They also had some little main city up in Memphis, to control this area, but their main city was Theban, or Luxor is its name today. And very close to that place, in Wadi el-Hol, it's not too far away from Dendera, they found again this alphabet. And what should they now call it? So they found it also in Egypt. Now they have found it in Sinai, and they found it in Canaan, as they say. And here it is. And can you recognize it? I think I have educated you a little bit now. So you can see some of it. I had pointed out some of them, in the next one. You can see the B, this house has become a little different. It's like they have widened out the entrance to be a little bigger. But you can see this head, this terrified person. You can see this river, that was one, and then become two. And you can see the M here, and the A, the ox head up here. And I just pointed out a few of them. And in here, it's a very special one. You can see the head here, and it has, his head is special. You can see this, I should take more picture of it, but it will be too long, but I can just explain it. They say this is a typical Hyksos head because of this haircut they had. And I don't know, but they said that was the haircut of the Hyksos, and they have found one head in Goshen that some say could be Joseph, because they see a lot of colors in his coat. And he had the same head, the same haircut. So they said this head is a typical Hyksos head. And this one is not that typical, but it's like a mushroom head, they call it. And you see the different letters here, the T, and the N again, and the ox head, the Aleph here, and here's again the river. And this is a T again. Isn't it interesting? I find it very interesting. So who was there? And who wrote this one? And they say, Goldwasser, that was her name, the professor, he said, this is possibly an Asiatic man. Yes, you are right. This is an Asiatic man, because that's what they also call the Hyksos people, because they come more like in from Asia up there. So, yeah, very, very interesting, that inscription, and they find more and more of it. In Senefer's tomb, he was a noble, and in tombs of the nobles in Luxor, they found something that they also say look alike. And that was also in the slavery time that he was the major of Theban, actually. He was a very high official. So he had one of these letters too. Maybe they found it more and more. This is from Canaan, from Tel Sayed. It's, yeah, where is it? Very close to Gaza area, around there. They found also the same letters, but you can see it starts to change a little. And I wouldn't call it Proto-Canaanite. I would start to call that Hebrew. But because if you see this M here, it is like waves and water, but it got a little extra down there, and also this one. And the T is kind of in this circle, and well, it is like the Proto-Sinaiticus, but it's starting to change a little. But it's found in Canaan, and this was also a Hyksos area at that time. This is from Lachish. Anyone been there? I think Eva and Jan, who is here, they have been there in Lachish, and this is found there. You can see there's a lot of drawing also. Don't be confused about that, but you can recognize the T, the M, and this one is more like a menorah. It's difficult to see sometimes, but it's letter all over, and of course you don't know which way to turn this stone, and you don't know which way they should write or read it. So I haven't seen the translation. Here also they found this in a city. I think I wrote it here. I have it in the next one. No, I think I have it some other place also, this one. But you can say now it's been turning more and more like an E, an A, I mean, and it looked like a W, but it's a Zin. I found it in this old city close to the place where David and Goliath were fighting. I know Eva and Jan is here today. They know the place. They have been there. Keifa something. I'm not good at words. But here also, 20 kilometers southwest of Jerusalem, they also found some, and that's very recent. It's not many years ago. They also found this Proto-Canaanite writing. And here we are back again, yeah, to this place, Kirbet Kaifa. Yeah, that was the name where they found it. And they found a name on this bottle or whatever it is. And it was Eshbal. And I think, no, it's a Canaanite name, and with Baal in it. But it could be an Israeli name again, and this was an Israeli city. Because Saul, King Saul, he has a son called Eshbal. But this is Eshbal ben Saul. It's not Eshbal ben Saul, but it's Eshbal ben Beda. But many others could have the same name. But again, we see the Proto-Canaanite, the first alphabet. And now we are going someplace else. We are going to Wadi Rum. I've never been there. But this was a place where the Nabatean was. But the Nabateans, they were later. And that's why this is not a Nabatean language or letters at all. Nabatean was, when they really started writing, it was 100 years before or after Christ. And we know their letters. They are more like the modern or the letters at that time. So this is a letter used by the people who lived in this area. And if you see again, can you recognize it? Up here, you see some of it? This is an T in this area, by the way. And you see some of them have changed a little. You have the Aleph, but some of them are very alike. And you see the hand, the cuff here. You see this 8 here. So if you look around, it's a little different, but it looks like an alphabet. And I think it is an alphabet with sounds and not like pictures. And that's found in Wadi Rum. And here they found some more in Arab area. You can see up here, there's a lot of the same. And there are two researchers, and I forgot to bring their name, but they are researching, and maybe we are coming back to it. They have access to all these writings in North Arabia and around in Arabia, and they also have gone around to see what kind of language are those people talking, speaking that was in this area. You can see a lot of drawing also camels. They have a lot of camels in this area. So in between, they have been written letters. Very interesting. Here you can see all these different, they have catalogs. If you're interested, I can send it, but you can see how like it, how it is so much like what we found earlier on in Proto-Sinaiticus alphabet. It's very much of the same, differ a little, like you are going from place to place, but this has been instead of the cuneiform because this was easier to learn and you can use it in whatever language you want because it's just a sound. We know that the children of Abraham was in northwest Saudi Arabia. We have Dedan, that was one of the sons, and Taima, and this is found in these areas. But up here is interesting because here they could translate it. They said this is around the Sinai mountain in Saudi Arabia. And one of those researchers, he said if you use it to say that these letters are sounds in Hebrew and connect them to Hebrew language, what does it say then? It says, died Amiyah, the daughter of Hagar. So it was a tombstone. And it was in Proto-Hebraic, like he said, it's more like it started to change a little to Proto, more like Hebrew. It's still, you can recognize some Sinaiticus, but it's going more over to be Proto-Hebrew, which is the next stage of this alphabet. And that is the same as what we call the Proto-Phoenicians. But here they could translate it, isn't that interesting? Died Amia, but Hagar, the daughter of Hagar. If that is the Hagar in the Bible, we don't know. There could be many others called the same. And here also you see some of the letters they started out to write. This could seem like it was Proto-Sinaiticus, but it's not. This is the next stage. It's Proto-Hebrew. This is, yes, the Ten Commandments. And what Ron Wyatt told us when we asked him, the language written in the Ten Commandments, what was it? Because he's the only one who has seen the Ten Commandments. And some people think it might be in pictograph or something that they used at that time, if he ever wrote the Ten Commandments. But he told us that it was in Proto-Hebrew. And that is the same as Proto-Phoenicians, that I say is the first really language in the world that has been developed from the Sinai language or letters. So then we have a clue here. If it's written in Proto-Hebrew, then Proto-Hebrew must have started around in this time. Because what they say is these wise professors, they say that, well, it didn't exist before the time of David and Solomon. And a short time before then the Hebrew started to use an alphabet, like Proto-Hebrew. Before that, maybe Canaanites or Israeli used this Proto-canaanite. They don't know because they haven't found that much. But they say no, there couldn't be a language that early. But it was. If that was they also have written in areas around Sinai, it must have developed at that time. It looks like it has. This is the Gezer calendar. Gezer is a town also in Canaan, you might say, or Israel, I will say. It wasn't Israel yet, but it became. And the Gezer calendar is not that old. But it's one of the oldest they have found in Proto-Hebrew. So this is Proto-Hebrew. And you can see there's a lot of letters that look alike the Proto-Sinaiticus, isn't it? You find a lot of them. So they say it has developed from that. But if you see the Gezer calendar, and here is an interesting mark. This is a fellow called Kim, Dr. Kim. He has worked in Saudi Arabia in many, many years for a mayor of Mecca. And he has been running around in the Sinai and taking pictures. There's some interview with him in YouTube. It's very fascinating, his story. He found the menorah on a stone. You can see he's pointing at it. I have a red arrow pointing at it. Very, very interesting. And then you can start, to see the letters around here. There's a lot of letters on the stone. It's not just the menorah. And if you take, I have taken 3, but you can sit and study from this Proto-Hebrew tablet, and you can find them on the stone he's sitting at. And I will tell you more about it when those people who are studying this now in Saudi Arabia, going around and study the Hebrew letters on the stones. And when they come out with the work, we are looking forward to see that. And maybe in that film we are going to see from Tim Mahoney that he's interviewing some of them. He might have. But you can see they have started here now to develop the Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew language. And so you might wonder, this line you see down here, this is the Hebrew they are using most of today. That is the Hebrew writing they learned in Babylon, unfortunately. After they had been in Babylon for 70 years, they started to write like the Aramaic had started to write the alphabet. Not like they used to do. So the Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew disappeared in the around 500, I think, before Christ. So you can see that today it looks a little bit alike, but not quite. But it has developed from the same, but it's quite different. So this line here is the real Hebrew alphabet. But they stopped using that. But of course they call it Hebrew today, what they write today, but it's an Aramaic way of writing. And Aramaic, it took over after the Akkadian language. Akkadian was widespread all over. When the Canaanites were writing to the 18th dynasty kings, pharaohs, remember the Amarna letters? They wrote from Jerusalem, from other cities, from Shechem, and they wrote and said, we are invaded, come and help us, remember? So I was thinking, what were they writing in them? Were they writing this Proto-Canaanite language or what? No. They write in cuneiform, Akkadian, dialect, letters, and send. So Akkadian was the language everybody had to learn, also in Egypt, to talk to each other. And they got a lot of letters from others, from Babylon also, and everything was written in Akkadian, in Babylonian, they also call it. But later on, the Aramaic became the main language. And we know also that from the time of Jesus, that they also write and talked in Aramaic, a lot of them. They still talk Hebrew, I think they did, but the writing disappeared. Just so you have this little time frame. But it's interesting to see, though, what the difference between, well, what we are interested in is the Hebrew, Proto-Hebrew. Now I'm going to talk a little about languages other places, because I find that also fascinating here in this context. In Armenia, that is not our Armenia, that's very real to say. Armenia is a country that before was very big. It took over after the old Urartu in the Van area and up in Ararat area. Today it's only a country behind the Ararat mountain, but it used to be a lot bigger. But I have found not many letters up there, but I have found some, and they are surprisingly very like Proto-Sinaiticus. Can you see where I put the red line down up here? And somebody asked here if the Ten Commandments are written in 2 languages. No, it's only written in Proto-Hebrew. Only Proto-Hebrew. That's what Ron Wyatt said, and that was the language they had developed at that time. The newest Hebrew was never used at that time. So here is very interesting that, and this has been found in a city called Metsamor that some of us have been in. It's an old city in Armenia, and they found some tables there. They also wrote in cuneiform because they were writing and sending letters to Babylon and vice versa, but they had also the letters from Proto-Sinaiticus. How in the earth could they have these letters up there? And they also called, I found this on an Armenian site, they also called these letters from Sinai, you know what they called them? The Hyksos letters. And I was so happy when I saw that, because of course it's the Hyksos that used this, not the Canaanites. It's the Hyksos that were in this area. But were the Hyksos far away up there? Well, maybe that's where they had it from. Everybody says that the civilization started in Sumer, but we know that it started around the places where Noah's Ark landed. And there is a big civilization up behind Ararat mountain and around it. But I haven't digged there because it was not interesting enough. Because when they started archaeology, they all went to Sumer, to Iraq, and to all these countries in the Middle East, and they were not able to get to Armenia because this was under Soviet Union. But now they should be going there more and more, I think, because they said also there is a lot of things to dig up there. They have lots of places they haven't been digging up. Maybe they find more. And that was just that I wanted to show you. Here is the letters from Metsamor, by the way, some of them. And here is a pottery sherd that they found in the not in Armenia, but in Turkey. But it was Armenia before. But it is very, 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 very old. And the man who found it is William Shea. And he was going together with Dr. Salih Bayraktutan beside what we think is the remains of Noah's Ark, and they found this pottery. And it was written here on the side of it. It was written Noah in the same letters as Proto-Sinaiticus letters. And I'm fascinated with William Shea that much, and he said this must be Noah's Ark. He was no doubt. I wrote to him and he answered me, and I said, you must have been very, very happy to see this, because he was so sure these letters really came from up here. And now he also found them. You can see it was also a drawing of Noah and sending out some birds. And it's so small I can't see it. It was found 20 meters west of the boat-shaped structure, and it was written some etching in it, and it was Proto-Sinaiticus. This they have just found. They're going all about near Caucasus, north of Caucasus. They found this. And can you see it? And they just found it, and they say, this must be the first alphabet in the world. And you see it's an I. It's like 2 numbers. There's a person here. Maybe it's the terrified person, and this is a bet. It is a home with an entrance and 2 rooms also. they just found it. I'm so fascinated to see it. And they say, well, they have this Proto-Sinaiticus up there. It's amazing. But you know, it was a small world at that time, and maybe no one knew how to write. That's what we have to say. Well, we are back to the Middle East again. And if you read on Wikipedia and other places, and they will say the first alphabet in the world, maybe they know, will say Proto-Sinaiticus, but when they really started to use it a lot, they say it was the Proto-Phoenicians. Of the Phoenicians, they brought the alphabet around the world. And the Phoenicians, they lived very close to Israel, and they had the same language as the Proto-Hebrew, the language that the Ten Commandments are written in. So what came first? They are actually discussing that, the Phoenicians or the Hebrews. One of them was the first, but they don't know which one was the first. So that's because they don't like Bible and Jews. They say, of course, this was the Phoenicians, because they brought it all over. But let's have a little look at that. Because it came to Greece from them. That's interesting. It came to Greece in the 1500 BC. That's the same time that the Ten Commandments were written, and we have the Exodus. It came in the middle of there. We have the Exodus. And I think I have told some people before, maybe not everybody, but Dan, he has his own Exodus, because he ran away when the slavery, in the middle of the slavery, he just ran away, says the historians. Some of them, some of the Danites, they ran away from Goshen. And here is what it's in Norwegian here, but I have to translate though to English. And it's this man here called Hakateus of Abdera. He lived 600 years before Christ, and he said at the strangers that was driven out of Egypt, because the Hyksos leaders was driven out at the first time. The one who was not the most, he said the most honorable of them, they followed Danaus and Cadmos to Hellas, to Greece. But most of them was taken by Moses to Judea. So they knew about the Exodus. But they also knew that some of them went away, like Danaus and Cadmos. And Dan, we know, Cadmos, I don't know who that should be, but some say he must be a Phoenician. But there was also another one. Aeschylus said that Danaus was from a divine, they were very high and divine. They called them gods, you know, like they like to do that time, but they came from Egypt. They were runaways from Egypt. And that's also something that in the book of Judges, in the Bible, it says, Dan, why did he stay by the ships? So Dan, he went away, some of them, and they come to Greece. And it was, well, I have to say that also, that the Bible says that Dan had one son, and his descendants came with Moses. But in a book of Jubilee, it says he had 5 sons, but 4 of them died. But it might be that they didn't die but ran away. We don't know. If you see also here, Dan, the tribes of Israel here, Dan was in this area. We know that also because Samson, one of the most famous Danites, he lived in this area. Jaffa and Tel Aviv, it was in the Dan area, but they was not satisfied. They got just too little, but they were not a big tribe because they just had this one son. But they wanted some more land, and because Naphtali and whoever was gotten this country up here, they didn't take all of it, all of Canaan. Dan went up here and took a piece of the cake up here also. So they took a town called Laish and called it Dan. Up here, and you see the Phoenicians was very close. Can you see them? The Phoenicians was here. Here you have the cities of Tyrus and Sidon and all the cities. Byblos, that was up here on the coast, and that was the Phoenician. But the Phoenician was Canaanites, and Phoenicians was a Greek name of the Phoenicians. They didn't call themselves Phoenicians. They called themselves the Canaanites. And why is that? Because Phoenicians was just the name of the color, and they sold some color, so they called them that. But Sidon, the biggest city at that time in this area where the king lived, he was actually the oldest son of Canaan in the Bible. So they were sons of Canaan, and they called themselves Canaanites. So Dan was so close to the Phoenicians, like you see, and they must have traveled also and visit their brothers in Greece, because that we have found out, and not me, but others, very interesting. And well, just have to go through this a little bit. But what they say is the alphabet was brought from Egypt to Greece by Danaus in the time of Cadmus. It's the other way of putting it, but it's interesting, isn't it? It came with Danaus, and it came at that time that we know it was developed, because it was developed from the Phoenicians, or the Proto-Hebrew language. And some say Cadmus was together with Danae from Egypt, and others say he was the Phoenicians. But it's so long time ago, so they don't have much written. And Danaus, he came here to Argos, and he took over the city after the king. His people was among the Argonauts that went to search for the Golden Fleet. And up here we have a name called Theban, and that was Cadmus. He started this city, old city in Greek. And that's very close to Athens. Shouldn't read too much of this, but it's a very interesting story how the alphabet came around to be the Greek language, who became the Latin language, and that is the language we use today. And well, I went too fast here. I just wanted to show you this. Yeah, of course, here was the picture that I wanted to see. What about Denmark? Is that a connection, somebody asked? And of course it is. That's the longer program. But many historians say that they went to Denmark and Ireland, the Danites. And it's just to follow the red hairs, because they had red hair, a lot of them. Well, anyway, when they digged up Dan up here, they found all this pottery. And they say, that's interesting. Why do we find so much Greek pottery here in Dan? Maybe it's not, maybe that has never, but you know what the researchers say. They say it's not been a Dan, a tribe of Dan, and Israel Tava. Maybe that is Greek people that lived here in Dan. But when you know what the old historian says, you know, of course, Dan was together in the ships with the Phoenicians. And they came back. They met their brothers up there in Argos and Greece and everywhere. They come back with all this pottery. And the pottery that you see here on the picture is mainly from Greece and Cyprus. One of the sons that disappears, one of the cities in Cyprus is named after him, Salimi, or Salimi or something. I don't know quite right, but it's a city there named after him. And so this pottery is from Cyprus and Greece. So we know Dan was there, and I believe very strongly that this was the first letters was Proto-Hebrew. And the Phoenicians, they learned the language from the Hyksos and then from the Hebrews. I think that must be the right way to put it. And I will end up this with this picture here in the end, because now we have used over an hour, I can see. But this is also Proto-Hebrew, or Phoenicians that some will call it, but it's Proto-Hebrew. And it is the 10 Commandments. Isn't that interesting? So where did I find that? In New Mexico, in America. So that will say the Phoenicians, or shall we say the Danites, went all the way, or maybe it was somebody else. It must have been before they were in Babylon. Somebody came to America and wrote these 10 Commandments on a stone in New Mexico. Well, shall we thank the Hebrew for having a language, or letters or an alphabet. That's the real to say, the alphabet, the sound alphabet that we can use to spell so many things and write books. And it's so easy when we have the alphabet. We can use it in whatever language we want as long as we have a sound. We put the sounds together and we can write everything. Shall we thank the Hebrew for that? Or God? I believe so. Thank you very much.